All right, well, I'm going to get started and get this show on the road. We only have an hour, so time is never our friend these days. And let me introduce myself. My name is Gareth Thompson. It's my privilege to be a volunteer for the Bow Valley Climate Action Group and the volunteer facilitator and moderator for this conversation today. I'm also the full-time executive director for the Alberta Council for Environmental Education, and this constitutes excellent education as far as I'm concerned. I'm pleased to be here for a number of fronts. And I'm going to name some names. Shannon Ripley is the name that attracted me to the very first ever meeting of the Bow Valley Climate Action. Judy Archer, who's on, say hi, Judy. Judy invited me to that first meeting. And when somebody like Shannon says, hey, we're going to do this thing, I know that it's going to be worthwhile. And that's why I attended the first meeting and have been privileged to play a small part of that in the group ever since. I want to give a shout out here to a couple of people. Judy Archer, who we've just acknowledged, who will be moderating the chat and asking questions that have been submitted by participants. Shannon Ripley, of course, who is the chair of the Bow Valley Climate Action. Jody Conwell, who is, if you're able to, Jody, just say hi and show us your face. She is the wizard who providing the back room, if you will.
I can say hi. I just don't have a camera, so sorry, guys.
Thanks, Jody. And now let me talk about our two speakers. So Laura Hughes, just wave your hand, Laura. Laura Hughes is currently with the Pembina Institute. I've had the privilege of working with Laura as a colleague at the Alberta Council for Environmental Education. She's wonderful to work with, and I envy the good folks at Pembina. I have a ton of respect for what Laura has done in her career. And speaking of respect, Mayor John Barman, say hi, John. Thank you so much for joining us. And I have a ton of respect for this man. He's been our mayor since 2012. Has done a heck of a job with a very challenging file, and has showed some fantastic leadership on climate. Part of the leadership, we'll get to that, but part of the leadership has been to ensure the hiring of somebody who wakes up in the morning thinking about climate action in Canmore. So I'll invite Amy Fournier to turn on your video just briefly, if that's possible for you. And Amy is the climate change specialist for the town of Canmore. In the same vein, I'll say, and so Amy will be a resource person to support the conversation and help out with the more technical questions, perhaps. Ditto for Michael Hay, who's the manager of environment and sustainability with the town of Banff, and has been. And hopefully we'll get to hear from him. And I'll just share this. We're going to be talking about municipalities, and Michael Hay gave me a 9-word mantra to think about municipal climate action, which I've never forgotten, although I have to read it, but just to make sure. But then here's the 9 words: energy efficient buildings. Hey, Michael, say hi, wave your hand.
Hi everyone. I'm shocked you remember this, but I think I know what you're going to say.
Tell me if I get it right. Quote: energy efficient buildings, low carbon transportation, fueled by renewables. How'd I do?
That's perfect. At least that's what I said back then.
Look, I want to, Michael, thanks for joining us. And we have the protocol of just turn your video on and off, and I'll turn on my video off when the time comes. But for now, just thanks for that. Turn your video off. And I want to begin 2 more things as a moderator. I'll mention that we have participants on the webinar from a wide variety of sectors, which is so exciting: tourism and hospitality, building and development sector, education, municipal government, nonprofit, federal government. It's a who's who, and we're thrilled that so many people have come to join us. We're at 48 right now, and that's wonderful. I'm thankful to Judy Archer for providing some wonderful text for land acknowledgement. So, because it's important that we begin in a good way by acknowledging the lands of Treaty 7 territory. We acknowledge the past, present, and future generations of Stoney Nakoda, Blackfoot, and Tsuut'ina nations who have cared for this land since time immemorial. Together, we steward this land as well as honor and celebrate this place. And I want to mention too that I'll add here to welcome reconciliation with our, to recognize the notion of reconciliation with our First Nations is a really wonderful and important piece. And it's appropriate for this conversation because we're also in the process of reconciliation with the earth, actually, through climate action and the important work that the speakers will tell us about today. So Jody, if I could have that slide on the Bow Valley Climate Action, just a backgrounder, thanks, Jody. And Jody, on my screen, possibly for others, it's a quite large font, so perhaps you might reduce that font size. I'll leave that wonderful technical challenge with you. But Bow Valley Climate Action is a not-for-profit group, as you know, made up of it's a volunteer organization that promotes citizen engagement with the ultimate aim of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the Bow Valley. More than 150 of us citizens, deeply connected and concerned. We believe in individual and particularly collective action to help combat climate change. And there's a website which isn't showing on my screen right now, but I'll just tell you what it is. It's bowvalleyclimateaction.org, and Shannon will reiterate that towards the end of our presentation here. Thanks very much, Jody. That's awesome. So the purpose of today is to foster a community conversation on how we might be able to, quote, build back better in the Bow Valley through the lens of climate action. So we're interested in supporting dialogue to explore how any future federal or provincial economic stimulus funding following the pandemic could be used to strengthen the Bow Valley economy and support local workers, while at the same time reducing greenhouse gas emissions and preparing the local economy for a low carbon future. In late March of this year, the Pembina Institute released a report on how economic stimulus funding could be designed to create just such a stimulus response. We were curious how these principles might apply here in the Bow Valley, and that's hence this webinar. We know that it's a very challenging time for local people, businesses, and municipalities, and we're so grateful to everyone who's made the time to participate, to our participants listening in, to our speakers, Mayor John Borrowman from the town of Canmore, Laura Hughes, Senior Policy Analyst from the Pembina. Thanks to the volunteers who have organized this event. And thanks to each of you who have tuned in to listen, ask questions, and participate in the discussion. And to those who will listen afterwards to the video recording, we'll tell you how to get that towards the end. It's by working together, listening, and learning from one another that we will be best positioned to respond to both the current economic crisis and the climate crisis. Our first speaker today will be Laura Hughes, who is Senior Analyst in the Alberta Clean Economy Program with the Pembina Institute, Canada's leading clean energy think tank. She runs the Alberta Narratives Project, working closely with Albertans and using climate change narratives that are effective in the province. Laura also worked with the municipalities as they transition to renewable energy. Laura, welcome, and thanks very much for coming in. I'll turn it over to you. Cheers.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be here. Like Gareth said, I am Laura Hughes. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst with the Pembina Institute. I'm based in Calgary, and I run our Municipal Leadership in Renewable Energy file, which is I support municipalities in their transition to renewable energy. And I also run the Alberta Narratives work, which supports Albertans to identify and use depolarizing and common language around energy and climate in the province. I'd like to take a minute to introduce the Pembina Institute for those who might not be so familiar with us. The Pembina Institute sees a bright future for Canada, a future in which clean energy drives a prosperous economy where no one is left behind and where our activities stop contributing to climate change. To drive this vision forward, we conduct research and we convene conversations to present practical perspectives and solutions to decision makers. Our secret sauce is that we build relationships with industry, governments, communities, and other nonprofits to design policy solutions and scale up the transition to a clean economy. We work in several areas to contribute to the following outcomes: a decarbonized electricity grid, a transportation system that transforms passenger and goods movements, affordable, healthy homes and buildings, and an energy system that recognizes the shifting role of fossil fuels. For those who are interested, here are some of the recent reports we've written, and the one on the right is actually, we just published this. It's an Alberta-specific report about the job potential in emerging sectors in Alberta. We've identified that there's a potential to provide 67,000 jobs in the next decade in this area, which is 2/3 of what the oil and gas jobs were in 2019. So before I dive into the content, I want to just take a moment of empathy and acknowledgement of what the Bow Valley is going through. And to acknowledge my own privilege to even have the mental capacity to think about the recovery right now. I know that a lot of people in the Bow Valley in particular are really hurting from COVID-19. The heavy weight of the tourism industry in the Valley, and it broke my heart recently to hear about the layoffs from the Banff Center. So this is not without empathy and acknowledgement of what you are experiencing. So what I want to share with you today is our Green Stimulus Report and the key recommendations from it. So when this all started in March, we hit the ground running with what we think the recovery needs to look like. And we were the first organization in Canada to share with the government and with the Canadian public our set of principles on what Canada's economy recovery should be based on to provide energy independence, job stability, a healthier environment, and a stronger economy in a decarbonized world. We don't want to boost economies in the wake of, let's not boost economies in the wake of one global health crisis by exacerbating another global health crisis. As the conversation moves towards the future, there's now public demand, a lot of public demand, calling for an economic development that is in line with meeting our climate targets, which makes a lot of sense. So in this report, we outline that economic recovery, which is rooted in climate action, will boost the economy in the short term and invest in a prosperous, resilient future. It will boost economic competitiveness and strength in a decarbonizing global market, and it will protect workers against future shocks and disruptions. All of this to say, this is a federal report, so not all of it will be perfectly applicable to the Bow Valley, but I'm going to do my best to extract what I believe can be supportive to you. So our guiding principles with which we wrote this report. First of all, prioritize funding for jobs resilient to economic disruption in a world limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's important to consider here, what might climate change affect down the road? What might a future economy look like with climate change? And what will be resilient to that? Prioritize investment in industries producing low or zero carbon goods and services. By making climate action a criteria for economic stimulus investments, we can make sure that we are moving towards our climate targets. Use investments in industry to incentivize decarbonization beyond existing regulatory requirements. So I think there's a really good opportunity here to not only show leadership, but prepare for what we will see in 2030, 2040, 2050 as far as regulations, and prepare ahead of time for that. And overall, make stimulus decisions with a climate commitment lens. In all considerations, we need to be thinking about how our commitments, how it will affect our climate commitments, and how our climate commitments may benefit from them. So from that, our key recommendations. First of all, invest in training for careers in the low carbon economy. Prepare workers for what is to come through a lens of resiliency. And Mayor Barman, these will be available to you afterwards. Invest nationwide in deep retrofits to decarbonize homes and buildings. This is a means of both job creation and reaching our climate targets at the same time. Invest in the deep decarbonization of Canada's electricity system, both through renewable energy procurement and energy efficiency. Invest in the, some people say ZEV or ZEV, zero emission vehicle economy, clean fuels, and Canada's transit systems. Stay the course on carbon pricing. This is here to stay. We need to not mess with this right now, and we need to design policies based on this existing in the long term. And address the issue of orphaned wells, both through funding, but also through financing oil and gas companies that have proven that they are able to and will clean up their wells when they are complete. So there's a few considerations to make through this process. First of all, on social equity, which is incredibly important. We need to address our two biggest challenges, climate change and social inequity. Our focus at this time has to be on jobs, and specifically on creating employment opportunities that will replace high carbon jobs. We need to focus on diversification. This can include employment and skills development in areas such as ecological restoration, geothermal, hydrogen, clean tech, clean fuels, transportation, electricity, and buildings. We need to provide retraining for existing workers as these jobs are shifting. And we need to remember the importance of depolarizing the conversation and making it not about anyone being an enemy, but going through this together through this hard time. Buildings represent 13% of Canada's carbon pollution. This is a massive opportunity to do something about our carbon footprint. By investing in deep retrofits to buildings and homes, we will create jobs in every part of Canada while addressing the climate crisis and the housing crunch simultaneously. Deep retrofits are healthier, resilient, and low carbon. They're healthy because they provide cleaner air and improved comfort. They're resilient because they're ready for extreme weather and earthquakes, which extreme weather we know is coming and already here. They're low carbon because they use renewable energy and carbon smart materials. The opportunity here is enormous. By 2050, existing homes and buildings will constitute half of our building stock, and that is a massive opportunity to decrease our carbon footprint. We need to make sure that we modernize the grid. Deep decarbonization of the electricity sector and modernization of the grid must be a top priority. I know Canmore and VAP are already thinking a lot about this right now, and I really appreciate that. I was saying to Mayor Barman yesterday that Canmore has really, really impressed me these days on this topic. We need to see massive investments, though, in renewables and in storage. Transportation. We need to electrify our freight. Transportation emissions come from both passenger vehicles and goods movements, both of them being freight vehicles. By 2030, it's expected that freight emissions in Canada will surpass passenger vehicle emissions. This is because of urbanization, online shopping, and same-day home deliveries. This contributes not only to emissions, but also to traffic congestion, noise, and air pollution, and a greater competition for curbside space. We need to electrify our heavy-duty freight to improve climate health and our health as well. Overall, we need to stay the course on climate policy. This is our big take-home to the federal government. This is the opportunity we have to put a down payment on what our future looks like, and we must not mess this up. We have our work cut out for us as far as meeting our climate targets goes, and we're not getting there yet. Rebuilding dollars are not enough. These efforts must be sustained and leveraged by robust energy and climate policy. Now's the time to start designing our pathways to 2050. This conversation has to be grounded in robust technical analysis and reflect a consensus around inclusive and truly transformative pathways. So what the heck does this mean for the Bow Valley? I've been thinking about this for the last week, moving towards this webinar, and this is my interpretation of what this means for the Bow Valley, but I recognize that people on this call and other experts in the Bow Valley know this more than I do, and this is just my interpretation, and I think that's open for conversation moving forward. Overall, obviously, make your stimulus decisions through a climate lens. You need to anticipate a continued carbon tax and anticipate continued impacts of climate change. Support employment opportunities that are resilient to future shocks. So the bad news is, this isn't going to be our last global pandemic. It's not going to be our last global disaster by any means. This is an amazing opportunity now to prepare to be more resilient when the next ones happen. I've been paying a lot of attention lately to investors, and I attended an online investment conference a couple weeks ago, and it was fascinating. And my big takeaway from that conference was over 80% of investors are now looking for investments that have less risk, that contribute to more jobs, and that are moving towards net zero. ESG platforms, the new corporate social responsibility is now environment, social, and governance. And investors are looking for ESG platforms or ESG friendly opportunities. So by providing those opportunities, you will attract investors, period. This is really coming. Tourism. I don't hold all the answers for tourism, but here's my thoughts so far for the Bow Valley is find a way, and this will probably mean sitting down in groups and talking and figuring out a strategy, but invest in tourism that's going to be resilient in the long term. So environmentally conscious businesses that also market themselves to be so attract investors and attract business. In the short term, adapt to local tourism. I think it's a great opportunity to attract Albertans in a way that is safe, but also can be marketed as carbon friendly compared to those vacations that you fly to. I think there's a really good opportunity there to frame yourselves in this way, at least in the short term. Buildings, lots to be done on buildings. Retrofits as a means of achieving energy efficiency and of job creation at the same time are really good use of your money. Retrofits for hotels and tourist attractions are a good opportunity. Public building retrofits and residential retrofits. I know that the Bow Valley is doing really well with a lot of retrofits right now, but I do know that Banff is no longer right now accepting applications for residential funding, so something to be considered there. Also net zero buildings. The YWCA Banff Sustainable Housing Courtyard project is a fantastic example of what can be done moving forward. More projects like that are a really great idea right now. Transportation. Municipalities can establish strategies to signal long-term commitment to vehicle electrification. Some examples, I know that it's in the plan, I think, for several communities in the Bow Valley to look at their EV strategies in the near term. Do it. Targets for this, examples of targets to set for yourselves can include just the quantity of people in the community who understand the advantages of electric vehicles, the quantity of EV charging stations, the quantity of people who might consider buying an EV, the quantity of EVs registered in each municipality. Pretty straightforward. There's already existing programs and funding on this topic. The Municipal Climate Change Action Center has an EVs for Municipalities program that's open right now. So there isn't necessarily a need to wait for federal stimulus money to jump on this. And active transportation is also a really cool opportunity. So there's a new report from the Portland State University that showed a 52% increase in food sales along a new bike corridor. And food sales have been really impacted by COVID. So there's an interesting opportunity that bike corridors could actually help the COVID recovery. An American national study also showed that bike infrastructure projects can create up to 46% more jobs per dollar than car-only infrastructure projects, because bike infrastructure projects require more labor and fewer materials. So it's a better bang for your buck in job creation to create bike infrastructure. And electrification. So decarbonize the grid for the sake of resiliency and also achieving climate targets at the same time. So what's really exciting is in the fall, the Pembina Institute out of Calgary published this report that for the first time ever, renewable energy, clean energy portfolios are now cheaper than natural gas, which is typically seen as the cheap energy. Both in steady generation and peak generation scenarios, renewable energy is now cheaper. And that's my recommendations for now. So this is me, and I look forward to your questions.
Laura, thanks so much. So here a couple of things. First of all, I want to say thank you. I just want to say how lucky I think we are to have you, Laura, on this call, and how lucky we are as Albertans to have this highly reputable national NGO, the Pembina Institute, active throughout Canada, very active in Alberta, and it's always been a great source of resources for those of us, who are seeking reputable and robust information and policy guidance. So thanks for mentioning that. I'll also. You mentioned a couple of things that you said, well, you know what, when it comes to tourism, you people were going to have to talk about this and how to make it happen. And I just want to give a very brief shout out here, but a heartfelt shout out to the Banff Canmore Community Foundation, who has some serious skin in the game on this conversation, and in fact has convened on at least 2 occasions that I'm aware of, some really good conversations on climate action for this community. So we've got some wonderful leadership here in this valley. And last but not least, Laura, thanks so much for your all of your ideas, including the notion of depolarizing the conversation on energy, which is a bread and butter of any education organization, including ours. And I'm thrilled to see that kind of pop up in your talk. Climate literacy, energy literacy, environmental literacy are all so important moving forward. I also want to suggest here that for anyone who's listening and has a burning question for Laura or Mr. Mayor Borrowman, here's how to get that done. Judy Archer, who you have I believe that anyone on this call has access to the chat and can single out somebody called Judy Archer. When you click on that chat, you go to the bottom right-hand corner and there's a bunch of different options for you. You can send the chat to and just select Judy, if it's okay, and type in your question. And please indicate also to whom you like that. It's Mayor Borrowman or Laura Hughes or both. Judy, you were going to say something? Are we good?
Well, I was just going to say, yes, they just have to click on the Q&A and it comes up on my screen, and I've got it.
All right, thanks so much. Listen, let's move on. I'm really pleased to introduce the Canmore Mayor, His Worship John Barman. Mayor Barman has been Mayor of the town of Canmore since 2012, and I'm trying to follow the advice of Jody, who said, please speak more slowly, you people, so that it's clear. So here I am speaking slowly. In 2018, the town of Canmore released its climate action plan and is followed up with a set of priority actions for 2020. Last fall, the town of Canmore declared a state of climate emergency, adding strength and urgency to the implementation of its climate action plan. So without further ado, if I might turn it over to you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll refer to the town of Banff, who's also with us today in a certain capacity. But for now, Mayor Borrowman, take it away. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Gareth, and good morning to all the participants. I'm happy that we've been asked to slow things down, because by nature I talk slowly and I tend to ramble. But fear not, I do have notes to read from. Just before I get started, I have to share my screen, so everybody can bear with me. There we go. I hope that's working.
That's working well, Mr. Mayor. You're on. So it looks good.
Okay, good. So firstly, thanks very much, Laura, for both being here today to participate with us, and for providing some really good overview of perspectives from Pembina. And while you were speaking, I was thinking how particularly topical some of your comments were to both the town of Canmore and Banff at this time, as we both begin to try to rebuild our tourism economy. And I'll note that as part of our plans for moving forward, we have or will be appointing an economic development recovery task force, which then will morph into a tourism task force. And this task force will be advising municipality and the business community on a number of ways that we can move tourism towards being a more sustainable economy. So watch for that. I do have just a few slides, and I put them together mostly so people can look at something other than my face through my few minutes, but there they are. So in the short time available, I will talk a little bit about the costs that are associated to projects that help to address climate change. And I'll try to show how economic stimulus grant funding is so critical in moving the needle on these matters. In this context, I'll focus on two things here in the Valley, both Rome Transit as well as our own solar projects. So with our partners in the Transit Services Commission, Banff, Lake Louise essentially, we started the first regional bus service between Canmore and Banff in the fall of 2012. And in 2017, we initiated a local service here in Canmore. We'd had discussions in Canmore for years about the possibility of a local bus transit, but the capital costs were always far too daunting for our small community. However, when the Alberta government, this is back in the PC days, created the Green Trip Incentives Program, grant funding became available for a broad range of transit-related projects. and with that fund matching municipal contributions at a rate of 2-to-1. So to provide some sense of the benefits received through this grant funding, this chart shows the impact of leveraging grant funds that has allowed us to implement such great transit delivery over the past decade. And on my screen, the little window showing my face is blocking the right-hand column, which I hope participants can see. But if you can see that, the local funding that has been contributed through property tax dollars, which is noted in this chart as $550,000, and that's showing under the blue column, the federal gas, I should say the general capital reserve. So that's a reserve that's funded through property tax dollars. But those funds were leveraged through 2 other existing grant programs, the Federal Gas Tax Fund and the Municipal Sustainability Grant Fund. Both of those are funds that are available to all municipalities in Alberta and with the federal program across the country for a number of projects. But when we take those 3 fund sources and put them together, the Green Trip funding matched those funds on a 2-to-1 basis. So the bottom line of the, call it $6 million invested to date for transit, 90% of that was funded through grant dollars. Without this funding support, honestly, it'd be really unlikely that Canmore could have managed to build the transit program that we benefit from today. And it's worth noting that ridership between Canmore and Banff has grown from just under 100,000 in 2015 to double that last year. And ridership on the Canmore local service has also increased by approximately 90% over 3 years. So collectively, these 2 routes average almost 900 riders per day. And many of those trips would likely have been taken in cars with 1 or 2 passengers. So imagine the GHG savings from 900 people a day choosing public transportation. And as a note, the GHG savings will continue to improve in the future as Rome Transit has begun purchasing electric vehicles for its routes. And they'll be expanding this program as other alternative fuel bus technology continues to advance. Of course, transportation is the 2nd largest source of GHGs here, so stimulus funding to support this infrastructure is a critical tool for achieving our GHG targets. Happily, these projects also provide social well-being and resilience co-benefits by providing low-cost travel options for our community. In the same vein, the recent work to reduce emissions at our municipal buildings has benefited directly through provincial granting programs such as the Alberta Municipal Solar Program. To date, the actual cost for the Civic Centre, Elevation Place, and Waste Management Centre phases 1 and 2 projects have come in at about $860,000. Of that, we received approximately 30% of the costs in grants, totaling $270,000. And this was largely in thanks to the carbon taxes that had been coming back for sustainable initiatives. With these grants, the net cost to the town for those 4 projects has been $590,000 and resulted in a total solar capacity being produced of 518 kilowatts. At this time, there is a 2nd project underway at Elevation Place to pretty much completely cover the roof there. And projects have been approved for both the Senior Center and Arts Place, all of which will hopefully benefit from similar grant fundings. So moving forward, as 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions in Canmore come from our homes, businesses, and other buildings, stimulus funding to help support energy efficiency and renewable energy would go a long way in helping us to achieve our GHG reduction targets. As well, both energy efficiency and renewable energy represent opportunities for good local jobs, support homeowners and businesses with reduced energy costs over the long term, and help us to be more resilient. And with that, I will turn the mic back over to Gareth and look forward to trying to answer questions as they arise.
That's great stuff. I have noticed that the question and answer, there's now 4 questions in there, and keep them coming, folks. Judy will be kind of having a look at those. And Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for your awesome presentation. Rest assured that your slides were visible, even you know, all columns all the time, and that was really neat. It's inspiring for me to be a member of a community that does so much on climate in this province. The cities of Calgary and Edmonton are also noteworthy, and as is the town of Banff. And I just want to acknowledge, on behalf of the organizers here, acknowledge and commend the town of Banff for releasing its Renewable Energy Transition Roadmap in 2019. And other than the presence of Michael Hay, which we absolutely value, he's with the town, they're otherwise unable to provide a speaker today due to demands related to COVID-19. We also invited the MD of Bighorn and the Improvement District Number 9, ID9, but they were also similarly unable to participate. So look, let's move on here. The next, and the good news is we have time. So please use the chat, please use the question and answer to submit your questions. I have a question that I will ask just to get us going here. But Jody, if I can invite you, because we have a polling question that's available. Jody, as we go here, can I invite you to post the polling question so that everyone can see it? And I'd invite everyone to wade in here. Click away, do that in 10 seconds. And then Jody, I'll invite you to kind of publish the results. Just, you know, these Zoom polls are really fun and help us move forward. And here's how we're gonna, here's my fearless proposal. Jody, do you want to keep waiting, or do you want to publish the results? Boom. So there's a overall, do you feel the pandemic and economic disruption will help or hinder work to address climate change? So 39% help, so it's, and then 24% not sure. Wonderfully interesting, and lots of smart people on this call. Here's a question, and this question is actually for Laura Hughes. And this was submitted by somebody who registered a few days ago. Laura, the current economic recession caused by COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on women and minorities. How could economic stimulus boost the economy and address climate change, while at the same time tackling these inequalities in how the pandemic has impacted society?
Yeah, that's a really big question. And thank you for that question. I actually, okay, well, to start with, absolutely, women and minorities are disproportionately impacted by both climate change and COVID-19, which I think has just magnified the impact that climate change does have on minorities and women. In both climate change related natural events and COVID-19, there has been increases in domestic abuse, increase of unpaid work that women do at home, greater strain overall on disadvantaged people. And what we need to do is collectively insist that stimulus funding is used intentionally to change the system as a whole. And the Pembina Institute doesn't have necessarily specific policies on this, but what we did do is yesterday I hosted a panel of incredibly inspirational women who are in the energy sector across Alberta, and we had an hour and 15 minutes discussing the role of women in particular in the energy transition. And it was an incredibly successful webinar. Hundreds of people are there, and it will be actually online on our website later this week. And I would really recommend for anyone who's interested in this topic going and looking that up. We've had a lot of really positive feedback on that already. So I'll leave that topic at that. Go check out our webinar.
Thanks, Laura. John, I'm going to invite you to comment on that question if you'd like, but I'm also going to give you, and mark my craftiness here, I'm going to give you another question that I think is a $64 question and submitted by someone, and then we'll turn it over to Judy Archer to come on and do question number 3. Here's question number 2 though. John, beginning with John, what lessons have we learned through the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic that can be applied to help take action on climate change and move towards a low carbon economy? Over to you, Mayor.
Well, isn't that an interesting question, Gareth? And thanks for presenting that. I'll take a fly at it, and perhaps if Amy has some more specific thoughts from her area of specialty, she could chime in. But one thing we've really have learned, there have been some positive things coming through this COVID pandemic. And one of those positive things is how our community has come together to recognize where our priorities should lie. And it's been very challenging, of course, for many sectors, particularly the business sector. They've been, by and large, sidelined. People haven't had revenue coming in. And yet life has continued. People have continued to engage in a number of meaningful ways. We've certainly learned a lot about engagement through other than face-to-face. And our council, and I know Banff Council did the same thing, we were able to bring back our previously approved budget and reassess the various importance of certain capital projects in the light of COVID. And I can see that same sort of shifting of priorities being applied to future budget approvals when it comes to the request for funding for specific climate action related programs. And Amy, if you have anything specific from your area of specialty to add in on that, that would be great.
Okay, I don't. I think you covered most of it. But the one thing I guess I would say generally is that I've been really impressed with how the people of Canmore have taken care of each other throughout this situation. And I think that to the same degree that our climate action needs that, and how as a town, a lot of our internal departments mobilized to make sure people weren't being left behind. And that same approach as we're moving forward on climate action, I think will be very relevant.
Thanks, folks. Laura has something to say. Go ahead, Laura, please.
Yeah. This question for me is something I think about 7 days a week for the last 3 months. What have we learned from COVID-19 that we can apply to climate change? I think, first of all, we need to take a step back and understand that what we have just witnessed is cooperation on a planetary level, which before this has seemed near impossible, and it just happened overnight. So first thing we can take is a ton of excitement and encouragement that we as a species can actually work towards a common goal. Second, we have also seen people mobilize overnight to decrease our carbon footprints in a lot of ways. Suddenly, every organization that wasn't able to work remotely within a week had the infrastructure in place to work remotely and stop commuting. We had a lot of actions just completely shift in how much carbon footprint we have. And what we need to do is make sure that we recognize the value of that and not just automatically go back to what it was before when this is all over. Let's foster this system and continue using it. Third, we saw oil and gas in Alberta tank because of a lack of demand, but a number of reasons. But we saw even more the vulnerability of our economy as it's weighted too much on one sector. And what we need to do is listen to that learning, remember to diversify moving forward so that we are not as vulnerable in the future. But overall, we need to remember that we do have the capacity to both act quickly and efficiently on a really large scale. I think that's a really fantastic lesson to take from this.
Laura, thanks so much. We have 9 awesome questions, and I'll turn it over to Judy to bring a question to the gang. share yourself if you want, Judy, and let us know. Let us know, unmute, and what have you got for us?
Okay, great, thanks. I'm kind of putting together a couple of questions that appeared when people registered, together with a question that Karen Antrobus has asked. And it's about, I'll read Karen's question. We hear that Alberta municipalities' hands are fairly tied in terms of being able to require that new buildings are built to a standard that's less carbon intensive than traditional structures. For example, we can't have our own stricter building codes. And there was an earlier question about building codes, so this can tie into that. Are you aware that of other tools, incentives, taxes, or any other technique that has been tried elsewhere in Alberta to move construction to be less carbon intensive? And there was also an earlier question about the 2020 National Building Code. So I think that this question ties into both of those ones. So either Laura or John. Laura's hand is up, so go ahead,
Yeah,
Laura.
I'll start. There's a couple things that I can say to that. As far as being aware of existing funding, there is currently available funding both from the Municipal Climate Change Action Center for municipalities, as well as the federal FCM, federal something of municipalities. There's existing funding on both. Sometimes you can partner with other communities or other organizations to become more eligible for that funding too. And finding workarounds or finding ways to get things to happen. What we've seen a lot, the Pembina Institute also is the host of the Business Renewables Centre Canada, which supports municipalities, businesses, organizations procure renewable energy in a way that is not cumbersome to them. So it's very intimidating to purchase a renewable energy project or a large quantity of renewable energy. So what we have done is created the center at which we facilitate that for you. It's of no cost to the buyer, and it's just with the incentive of moving this forward more quickly. And for smaller communities that don't necessarily need to purchase a massive project, we've actually also outlined in this Business Renewable Center how you can work together with partners, so other municipalities, or go together with people to purchase renewable energy, which is then at a lower cost and also lower risk.
John, you take it away.
Gareth, are you still there, Gareth? What happened?
I'm still here and listening intently. Take it away, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, and thanks for your answer, Laura. And Karen, thanks for bringing this question forward. It's a really important question. And as has been noted, the Alberta Building Code is the Alberta Building Code, and municipalities can't alter that or stray from it. But outside of that, municipalities do have their own guidelines. For instance, in the town, we have green build guidelines that sets up essentially a series of incentives for builders to build a little greener than perhaps they'd been thinking. And more recently, we were just talking to council about engineering design guidelines, and I'm not sure if there's tools within those guidelines that would affect this issue. Outside of that, the municipalities always have various bonusing tools. I mean, we have applied various bonusing decisions to encourage more affordable housing, for instance. So there is that opportunity for us to work directly with individual builders to see more sustainable building. But it's really important for people to understand and recognize that when there's an increased cost of construction, which is attributed to perhaps a higher grade of design or build, that will translate into a higher cost of house. I mean, more expensive house. So we're kind of it's a push-pull here. We want to build more sustainable homes and buildings, but we also want to bring more affordable housing to the market. So there's a conundrum there that we do have to walk down the middle of and find ways of making this work. And one of the participants also mentioned on the chat line referenced the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and FCM is very progressive in the work they're doing on these matters, and do offer a lot of programs that municipal leaders can be involved with, both to help learn, and FCM also provides some funding for municipalities to move forward with various initiatives. Looks like Michael has something to add to that comment, so I'll cede the microphone.
Oh, it's okay. Thanks, Mayor Borrowman. I'm just conscious of time, so I thought I'd jump in on the 2020 building code question. I think a lot of people are familiar with the BC building code, the energy step code that they have, which to a certain extent does give municipalities the ability to determine energy performance requirements locally. And one of the interesting features of the 2020 national model code, which is currently under review or is probably going to be released formally later this year, is that it includes something similar for the first time, which I think they're calling tiered performance requirements or something like that. So there's a possibility that in the near future, the possibility of municipalities making some of the, or having a bit more control over that may arise. But of course, it depends on the provinces adopting that national model code. And in the previous provincial government, legislation was passed which required the province to adopt the latest national model code 1 year after it's released. But we'll see if that actually happens. So it'll be interesting to see how building codes evolve in Alberta over the next year.
Listen, folks, thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for chiming in. It's so glad that we could get your voice on this call. Folks, time is not our friend, and I'm going to reluctantly move on in our agenda. I want to say, though, that if you click on the Q&A, there's 12 great questions there, and I would invite any one of our resource people, from Amy and Michael to John and Laura, to type in and just respond to those questions while we chat here. Part of our moving on is that we'll have a call to action from our peerless leader, Shannon Ripley. And we have another polling question, which I think is a great deal of fun. Go ahead, John.
Gareth, just to that last suggestion, I'm not that good at writing and thinking and talking all at the same time. So I'll try to, if somebody can provide me with those unanswered questions, I'll try at some point in the near future to provide answers via email or something.
That sounds good, and that is by way of invitation. If you have a question for, say, Mayor Borrowman, type in your email address into the Q&A. Otherwise, he'll have trouble getting a hold of you. But that's a very kind offer. Thanks so much, John. And Laura, do you want to say the same? Same apply to you, Laura. Thumbs up. If cool. Thank you very much. Awesome. All right, Jody, if we could have our next polling question, please. And you smart people can read that and respond to it. I'm going to not say anything for 5 seconds.
And I know how tough that is for you, Gareth.
Oh, Mayor Borrowman, you know me so well. Okay, Jody, when you're ready, when you're ready, let's have the results. Yes, somewhat, and no, though, that's great. That's thrilling, actually. It's hard to hit a home run in just the course of an hour-long webinar with a chatty moderator like myself. I'm going to call on Shannon Ripley to come on up and show yourself, Shannon, and just bat us home with a call to action. Shannon, is your video working today? There we go.
So thank you, Gareth. Thank you very much. As you mentioned at the start of this webinar, the main purpose of Bow Valley Climate Action and all of us as volunteers working together is to foster citizen engagement and action that reduces greenhouse gas emissions in the Bow Valley. And as part of this webinar, we want to invite everyone listening, both now live as well as to the recorded webinar afterwards, we invite you to contact our federal and provincial representatives to let them know what you learned on this webinar, and to communicate about the conversation that we've had here and the opportunities you see from your perspective for economic stimulus funding to support both short-term economic recovery and social well-being, and also long-term economic resilience and strength in a decarbonizing world. We did invite our MP Blake Richards and MLA Miranda Rosen to participate on this webinar, and I don't believe they were able to join us live, but we will send them the links afterwards as well. And we, as Bow Valley Climate Action, will be drafting a letter to each of our representatives following this webinar to share the link and to communicate what we have learned through this community conversation. And those letters that we draft, we will also make available through our July Bow Valley Climate Action newsletter that goes out, and on our Facebook page and our website. So if you'd like some ideas and you're interested in writing, you can look at those places to find a few ideas if you're interested. If you don't already receive the Bow Valley Climate Action newsletter, you can go to our website, which will be listed in the next slide I have, and sign up there to receive the newsletter. We're made entirely of volunteers. All of our activities are run by volunteers, and we always welcome new members. So if you are interested, please feel free to get in touch with us via the website to join up. And above all, we encourage each and every one of you to think about how, in your role as a community member, as a family member, as an employee or a business owner, and your role in nonprofit organizations or organizations in the Valley, to think about your role and how you might be able to start talking with others about this topic that we've discussed today, to imagine creative solutions and how we might build collective momentum to support economic recovery while addressing the climate crisis at the same time. As both Laura Hughes and Mayor Borrowman mentioned before, our strength is in working together. We've seen amazing ability to do this through the very unfortunate reality of the COVID-19 crisis, but it also can give us hope that we have real potential to work together to address some of these really difficult topics. I'm going to share my screen right now. I would also like to say a very big thank you. Pardon me just one moment here. Is that showing up for everyone?
You're good to go.
Wonderful. I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone who's participated in this webinar. A massive thank you to Mayor Borrowman from the town of Canmore and Laura Hughes from the Pembina Institute for so graciously and generously sharing your time to prepare for this presentation and then to participate in it. We know you were really busy with all of your other commitments and duties, and we really appreciate you volunteering to do this. We're also extremely grateful to all of the volunteers from Bow Valley Climate Action who worked mostly behind the scenes to make this possible. There's a few of us here who you can see, but there are many, many people who've helped to make all of this happen. Their names are listed below. We would also like to say a thank you to Gareth Thompson for moderating. And we would like to say thank you to the Community Climate Hub Initiative. This is a federal nonprofit group, and we're a member of the Community Climate Hub Initiative as Bow Valley Climate Action. They have offered to give us a little bit of funding to cover the costs that we incurred to host this webinar. So things like having a Zoom account for a month and getting that all set up, as well as a few costs around that. So thank you to the Community Climate Hub Initiative. And I would like to say as well, Pembina Institute is a nonprofit organization. Part of its funding comes from donations. And so if you really enjoyed this webinar today, we would invite you to consider making a donation to Pembina Institute by going to their website. And when you do that, perhaps to mention that you enjoyed the webinar today and we appreciate their efforts for this. Also, Bow Valley Climate Action is a nonprofit. We are not a charitable organization, and we are still getting going in terms of making it easy to donate to us. But if you are feeling so inclined, you can reach out via our website, and we would be very grateful for financial support as we go forward and keep working to host public events such as this one. So I am going to turn it back over to Gareth for a wrap up. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Shannon. Listen, folks, I'm going to give you two quotes. They're both awesome quotes that'll change your life, and we're going to be done in 90 seconds. So stay with us for just a few seconds. Now you know, by the way, why the awesomeness of Shannon Ripley, who talks and smiles at the same time, which is quite a task, and she's quite wonderful. Here's quote number one, Margaret Atwood. Calling it climate change is rather limiting. I would rather call it everything change. And that's true, and it can be overwhelming in that way, but it is a big opportunity. It means that everyone can play in this space. And I'm gonna reiterate Shannon's awesome question. How can you use your role and position in our community to support, and this is a question for everyone listening, to support collective action that supports economic recovery, a strong social fabric, economic resilience, and mitigates the impact of climate change. WolvValleyClimateAction.org is the website. Please remember that. So if you ever want to learn anything more about from this wonderful organization, the recording from today will be on that website, WolvValleyClimateAction.org, and on the Facebook. And I'll just close by saying I would encourage people to do something. Doing something is important, and it makes you feel good, and it gives you hope. David Orr says, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And so I encourage you to try and find something, as Shannon has suggested, roll up your sleeves, do something that connects to our topics today, and enjoy the hope that gives you, and share the hope with others. Thanks to the Bow Valley Climate Action Group for putting this together. Been a real privilege. Mayor Borrowman, Laura Hughes, thank you so very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, folks. It's a wrap.
See you out and about.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.